I am your host, Alan Bennett, and I am delighted to introduce you to Bea Apple, today's entrepreneur. And Bea has a business called Hillfolk, which we are going to get to in a minute. But today we're going to talk about her fantastic journey in entrepreneurship. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Alan.
I've briefly, so I'll let everybody in that you and I had this conversation before, just a brief conversation about we came from way different backgrounds into what we're doing now.
Right.
And what you're doing now and where you started was like, what? So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that journey. Did you start out as an entrepreneur and as a kid making money, or how'd this go?
You know, um, I the word entrepreneur, it's really siloed in terms of like when you think of an entrepreneur, you think of somebody who owns a brick and mortar or like some sort of consulting agency or whatever. But in my journey as a business owner, and then looking back on my life, I really have come to realize that entrepreneurship, it's not just about an actual physical location, but a mindset and a desire and a passion to and a curiosity about the world around you and the desire to make it better and figuring out ways to leverage the resources that you have and the community that you're in to help build a business or create initiatives or create community in order to like improve your life and the lives of the people around you, as well as a path to financial sustainability is and which is the dream. But I started out, I'm originally from the Bronx, and I've always been a really creative person. And I think that's another thing that entrepreneurs have, is that they're super creative people who are able to literally create with the resources that they have around them. I grew up in a tough situation in New York City. And so I knew from a really young age that I had to be a self-starter, that on a lot of levels, especially with the family situation that I was in at the time, that I was going to have to learn how to build community on my own. And that's something that as a kid, that was really kind of burned into my brain because I just didn't have a whole lot of resources when I was young. I went to school moved to Arkansas in 93 and went to Rogers High School. And really, I've always been a creative. I've always been a crafter. When I was a kid, I taught myself how to craft out of library books and, black and white with pictures. And, we didn't have YouTube in the 80s. And so it was like, I really learned resilience through those years yeah. But basically, I've always been a creative. I've always loved to draw. I've always liked the idea of creating something out of very little, just because that's kind of the situation that I was in. But when I moved to Arkansas to live with my aunt and my uncle, I really wanted to go to art school when I was graduating high school. But the thing about art school is it's super expensive, and I didn't have the money to be able to apply. Because back then, especially like we didn't have there was no such thing as like digital files back then. So you would have to physically mail your portfolio, and the fees were expensive. So I ended up going into engineering. And where I first kind of got that spark was I was at a U2 concert that I went to. It was their Pop Mart tour, and the lighting in the show was incredible. And I was reading through like the tour booklet, and there was one line in there that said something about how, they had to use engineers to be able to create all of these beautiful light installations. And in my mind, I was still heartbroken over the fact that I kind of had to put my dreams of being an artist to the side. In that moment, I saw a path. that I could take this very practical career that would give me a better opportunity of getting a job right out of college and kind of hopefully leverage my way into some sort of creative opportunity further down the road. So fast forward many years later, 2011, I was still an engineer at that time and working up in Rogers for a food safety company, and got the opportunity to open a coffee shop in downtown Bentonville. And this was right before Crystal Bridges opened. And what I found is that, so that is a funny story because, my ex-husband and I, we really wanted to do a coffee cart on the square. And this was when Bentonville was like on the verge of becoming what we see it now, how it is now. And we were like, well, we want to get on this train before it really blows up. And so, using my engineering skills, I was able to pull together like a schematic design for a little coffee cart. We put together a business plan, and then we got approached to put in a coffee shop in downtown Bentonville. And it was kind of a make it or break it moment. And we took the risk and opened it. And it was Press Room in downtown Bentonville, which is like, there's two press rooms. There's the OG press room that I ran from 2011 to 2016. And then there's the press room that became it was on the Bentonville Square before Rope Swing closed it down earlier this year. But that was my first jump into entrepreneurship. And if you had told me at the time, if you had told me years ago when I was in college that I would end up opening, one of the most like popular coffee shops in downtown Bentonville, I would have laughed in your face because there was nothing about opening a restaurant that sounded attractive to me, just because it is so risky. But I opened it in 2011 with my ex, and then it kind of blew up. It was amazing. And I learned so much about myself. And, I had a baby about 6 months after we opened. But I really learned through that process that I was able to leverage some of my like creative talents that I had from the time that I was a kid. It was just applied in a different way. It was, developing a brand, coming up with menus. And then there's a lot of creative opportunities when you're hiring a staff. Because when you think about like the mix of people that you want and you're trying to create an experience, that's a creative act as well. And so I did Press Room for 4 years, and that was a lot. It was 4 years, 7 days a week, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it was a grind. And then ended up selling that restaurant to Rope Swing. And then I came on board with Rope Swing as a consultant and a project manager to help develop a bunch of new concepts for downtown Bentonville, including the Preacher's Son and the Record and the new Press Room and the Holler and 8th Street Market, which Hillfolk is located in now. And that was another amazing experience where I got to work with some of the best architects, brand agencies, and creatives to help develop these new concepts for downtown Bentonville. And it was really exciting to be a part of that team and be able to take a vision from the founders of Rope Swing and translate it into something that I felt would be great for myself and my community. And then in 2018, I had the opportunity, there were empty retail spaces at 8th Street Market, and I worked on that project as a project manager, and then had helped like on some projects like bringing all the murals to 8th Street Market, things like that. And it was another make it or break it moment for me. And the idea for Hillfolk had been a seed that was planted when I was a kid. From that time where I taught myself how to craft. For me, when I was a child, I was 9 years old, I was walking to the library with my little sister, and I taught myself step by step how to do these things. And what I realized as I was kind of coming up with the idea for Hillfolk was, I want to build something for that younger version of me. What would 9-year-old Bea have wanted around her when she was learning how to craft? And what that looked like was a space that was super warm and welcoming, that's dedicated to local, handmade, has a staff that's like educated and knows what they're doing and is like really passionate about sharing their creativity. And then also had like craft supplies and that type of thing. So that was kind of how I ended up at this juncture. And it's kind of a roundabout path.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yes, it's very exciting.
Now, you said something very early on when we started talking. You mentioned the word around when we were talking about entrepreneurship, and you mentioned mindset. I could not agree more. I think you're like the 46th episode that I've done, and you're the first one that has described it that way. And that's exactly the way I see it.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that, about the mindset of entrepreneurship. What does that really mean?
Well, for me, it's, the thing about entrepreneurship and the privilege of being able to own and operate a business is that it's a highly risky, scary, like endeavor. And, you know, when I talk about mindset and as how it relates to entrepreneurship, in order for you to be able to have the audacity,
Yeah.
but
Right.
to take an idea and put money behind it and put your own financial well-being on the line, that front line of being able to like sustain and keep it going and achieve the mission that you set out for, it starts here. And I think it starts here and it starts here. And as I would say, especially as women and especially as a person of color, like, the society around you tells you that you don't belong here. It's harder for women to access financing. There are structural barriers in place that keep, Black and brown folks from being able to get financing from a bank. There's a lot of barriers to it. And in order to push past those barriers, especially as someone who inhabits a marginalized identity, you got to have this. And you have to have the guts to be able to stand behind the idea that you have. But you also have to have the discipline up here
Mhm.
and the ability to connect with other people, because none of us do this in a vacuum. It takes community and it takes community support and community buy-in, especially when you're operating a retail business that depends on foot traffic.
Yeah.
That's all relationship based. And, on a real fundamental level, like it takes bravery to be able to put yourself out there and stand behind your ideas and be able to defend it, because, economic times are tough.
Yeah.
And especially for retail, it requires a lot of creativity and innovation. And so that's when I talk about mindset, I think about like, and especially as I look back on my path and how I've gotten here, it was all here. And there, and,
Yeah.
some of the barriers are up here first, right?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Right.
Number one, I have to believe I deserve it.
Yes.
And number two, I gotta like, just show up every day. So I think that's kind of
Yeah.
when I mean talk about mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. I went my first 10 years out of college. I went to University of Arkansas, and for 10 years I was in the chemical industry.
Mhm.
And I just didn't felt right from about year three. I'm like, something's, I don't get it. I'm not buying into this. I liked what I did. I just didn't buy into it. And then it took me a few years to figure out that my mindset was different than some of the others that were doing well in there. And I didn't realize that until I started entrepreneurship. And you take once it hits here, that's when it
Mhm.
feels right. You're like, I've done something. I'm not
Yeah.
making any money, but but boy, it sure feels good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was kind of my situation too, is like, you know, when I was an engineer, I never thought I would be opening a business, and I never
Yeah.
thought I would be where I'm at right now. The opportunity came, and, my husband at the time, we jumped on the opportunity because it was just too good not to. And
Mhm.
it wasn't until And the thing is like when you're actually in the weeds of owning and operating a business, especially a restaurant, you know, it's a lot of it is a grind. A lot of it is managing people and dealing with customers and, you know, all of that stuff. But there were some really magical moments, like in the process of owning and operating the restaurant, where I would look around at the restaurant being packed and I would see my staff and we would be on it that day.
Yeah.
And, you know, people were happy and I was like, wow, like I was meant to do this. I'm actually really good at this. And and I had enough moments where it kind of like reinforced to me that I actually had the ability to be able to make stuff like this happen. So even though I jumped into entrepreneurship a little bit unwillingly because I was like, I don't know, this is scary. It's really scary. When I got into it and was able to have kind of those affirming moments, I was like, I'm kind of addicted to this. I'm kind of addicted to the idea of having the idea and envisioning it and then seeing it actually come to life. And I actually had this experience as well when I was consulting on a lot of the new projects is, you know, like when we would come up with a new restaurant concept, the architects that we would work with, they would come up with a 3D rendering of the actual physical space. And it would be mocked up and it would look almost like a photograph where you could see how the space would look like with the finishes and with people in it. And I saw that happen over and over where once we got through construction and we went through startup and we would get to the point of where the business was actually running, where what I would see around me would match what we had seen in the rendering. And that's such a powerful experience to have as a human being, to be able to see your ideas come into fruition. And I guess I've just been hooked ever since.
Yeah. You know, one thing I have found about entrepreneurs, and you just described it indirectly, and it's about vision. So, so entrepreneurs can, in their mind, can create something as whatever it is that they're doing. They can see it like it is the phone or the glass in front of them. It's that clear to them, and it's getting that vision conveyed to the people that work with them. So talk about that when you take that vision of whatever it is you're trying to do. How do you work with your team so that they also see the same vision and share that passion that you have?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to throw a curveball.
Oh, no, that's a great question. Hold on. I'm going to get another sparkling water.
Okay.
Right. So number one, the vision needs to be crystal clear up here. But also when I talk about the heart, like, and I think it's Maya Angelou who had this quote, but she said, people will always remember how you make them feel. And that was something that I learned when I was running Press Room, is that, you know, things may not be perfect in the restaurant. This table might not be cleared or whatever, but like that person to person experience, how can we make that memorable? And I always knew how I wanted to feel. And like every business, every concept that I've been involved in, I would lead with that. Just like, I know how I want to be greeted when I walk into a place. I know how I want the place to smell. I know how I want it to look. I know. So all of that should be pretty well fleshed out within yourself. You should, and it should be backed up by market research and all of the things. Like you got to have the data to back all that stuff. So number one, being clear on all of it and really thinking about it from the perspective of not just from a P&L perspective, like I know how it's going to operate that way, but I know how it's going to look and feel, and I know the type of experience that I want to create. Transparency is the second one. I've always been really open with my staff about the good, the bad, the ugly. You know, I'm not your typical CEO in the sense that like I'm very far removed from the lives of my staff. and what they're going through. I think that's also something that I learned from operating a restaurant. I was always on the floor with them. And I think that's something that I also learned early on as an engineer is, you know, the first company that I worked with as an engineer, they built submarines. And I saw from a real like experiential level that the people who are making this happen were, I mean, it takes everybody, but in terms of like who's actually building, it's the people getting their hands dirty, like those on the at the ground grassroots level, right?
Mhm.
And so, I kind of walked into that environment with an air of like humility and like wanting to learn from the trades, whether they be electricians or plumbers or whatever. So I think it's humility and the ability to like engage with my staff on a level where they understand that I'm here for them. And they also know that like on a deep level, like what I'm going through. Like I'm real open and I care.
Mhm.
And I'm also a mom to 3 kids. And so I just can't help it that, I'm going to view everything that I do through this lens of like, on some level, we're always nurturing
Mhm.
an environment for the people around us, whether you're a father or mother or an aunt or an uncle or any of those roles that we play in our everyday life. I don't when I come from to work after dropping my kids off, I don't stop being a mom just because my kids are at school. I'm taking all of that kind of heart into the space with me. And so I think, and that all ties into transparency. I am who I am, and I'm going to show up with my staff and with other people and from a really authentic space. Because I think, and actually, this was proven to be true on a scientific data level. And it's a little bit of a tangent, but uh, there was a group of MIT researchers that like did a study on like this power of like the energetic frequency of different emotions. And the most powerful energetic frequency is authenticity. And so, more than love, more than anger, it's just being real and being connected to who you are. So, I think that was it. And I think also the vision of the things that I've created are rooted from a place of authenticity, because whether I was creating a restaurant or whether I was creating a craft store, I wanted to create something that was rooted in my experience and was something that I was building to help create a physical space for people to feel good and
Mm.
to experience joy. So I think that's the other aspect of it. And then I think just communication
Mm.
and always, because, with my staff, it's a back and forth because they teach me as much as I'm teaching them. Because a lot of my staff is younger than me, and a lot of the ideas that I get are actually not from me, but from them and their
Mm.
experience. And so I think again, it's a humility aspect of I don't walk into a room thinking that I have the answers to everything. And realistically, when I'm not here, they're the ones who are the face of the store. And that's a huge responsibility. And so, you know, I really respect their opinions. I
Mhm.
respect their creativity, and I feel like the staff know that. I think we all feel like we're in this together, and we're all building this business together.
Yep.
And they've been with me through a lot of hard times,
Yeah.
so they've seen this business go through its ups and downs, um, and I appreciate that from them,
Yeah.
and I appreciate their loyalty and they're just continuing to hold me accountable and then also reaffirming why I do the work that I do. So it's a lot of
Yeah. Yeah. I, I was listening to what you were saying, but what I heard was you were describing trust.
mm, Yeah.
That was, I mean, that's the message that I interpreted in all of what you were saying there: authenticity and communication, connection, compassion. There's
Mhm.
lots of things that you were talking about there. And so so we've talked about your team, but also let's talk about the people that come in, your customers that come in the store. Does it stop with just your team, or do you do the same thing with your customers? How does that relationship work for you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, man, and customer service and retail is tricky because you've got to be able to deal with the public on a
Mhm.
really a really broad level.
All
Uh,
different kinds of people, right?
all different kinds of people. Um, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the customers they have, and especially because, Hillfolk especially is a craft store, like the customers who come in and spend time at our craft nights and who invest money by buying product from us or buying um or paying for workshops and being in our space, they're trusting me by coming
Mhm.
into my space. And I don't take that lightly at all. And so I think trying to come from a real, again, humility, I want to do my best to meet people where they're at when they come in. And then also knowing that the seed of Hillfolk was to create a maker space that was accessible, that was friendly, that helped people overcome that initial fear and the grip that perfectionism has on a lot of people,
Mm,
and it actually keeps them from engaging in creative pursuits.
yeah.
Knowing that I wanted to break that down from the moment that they walk in the door, and also knowing that from a real numbers perspective, I need to be able to have a reputation of being a space that's warm and welcoming. Because especially in the internet age,
Yeah.
you can't just run amok and treat people badly,
Yeah.
expect for people to come back. And so I think that's been, especially because our mission is to get people into crafts,
Mhm.
recognizing that in the times that we're in, that kind of knowledge has been lost from a lot of people. Like a lot of, every single person that comes in and talks to me or talks to my staff, they have a story about how their grandma or their great grandma or their
Mhm.
mom, they have a blanket or they have a Christmas stocking or they have something. And they're trusting me with a
Mhm.
story attached to something that's very sentimental and usually has a really, deep place in their heart. Um, but knowing that so many people have these fond memories of crafting or handmade things and wanting to connect with them on that level and help re-spark that joy and get them excited about possibly jumping into that
Mhm.
creative pursuit. We try and do our best to be warm and welcoming in that aspect.
Yeah. So earlier you talked about entrepreneurs' constraints were, in their self-constraint as
Mhm.
far as being an entrepreneur. And now you've talked about clients sometimes have that same constraint that they may not be able to do what it is that you help them do.
Mhm.
So you're mapping that out the same way. So let's talk a little bit about mentors, because that's where I was thinking that you're talking about. So you not only mentor your team, you also mentor your customers.
Mhm.
That's the way I interpreted what you were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And back when I was doing pitch decks for Hillfolk, one of the things that we said was we would like to provide scaffolded support for customers on their craft journey.
Mhm.
And so we really try and think about that from a product assortment to a staff mentality of we're here, and also from a programming aspect,
Mm.
like we're hosting weekly free craft nights where people can come and engage with other community members and be able to have that person to person connection and learning. But yeah.
Yeah. So last question.
Mhm.
I promise I'm not trying to throw a curveball. I talk to entrepreneurs of all kinds across all different industries and segments, and one thing that's been a common thread is they all have to find a way to innovate in
Yeah.
whatever industry that they're in. So in
Mhm.
your industry and in your business, what does innovation look like?
Well, that's a really good segue into like one of our big announcements and things that we've been working on. So, we've actually been working on launching a line of 31 craft kits in 1,500 Walmart stores, and that's fixing to be launched next month. So, craft kits, well, we've been working on it for 3 years, and innovation has played heavily into the development of that line and also the strategy around how it's created, how it's promoted, who it's for, like all of that stuff. So in the craft ecosystem, we recognize that there has been a loss of information transfer because people have less time and resources to be able to actually engage in a creative pursuit that takes time and money. And so from my perspective, um, as a business owner and someone who also wants, was working on like, what is the product to get people into craft, knowing that there's barriers to access and internal and external from a
Mhm.
time and money perspective on the external perspective, but then internal from the up here,
Mhm.
and up here, like being afraid or,
Yeah.
I've had so many people come in and say, I'm not a crafter. I'm not creative. And that's not true. Everybody can create, everybody can craft. And so, innovation had to take place in the sense of what's the product and how do we talk about it? So when we were coming up with this product line, we really thought about what are the specific things? Well, we knew we needed to make a kit or some sort of, well, basically a kit. And this actually happened during COVID because with COVID, when we had to close our doors, we basically took two of our best workshops that, were continually sold out before COVID, and we kitted it up and then had all the social media to go with it. And we put it on our website. And it was those kits that actually helped us sustain through the
Hmm.
pandemic. Well, when we came out of COVID and we had the opportunity to develop this product line, we knew it's a kit, but we need to cover a lot of different craft disciplines from a economic perspective. Like I knew we couldn't silo ourselves in just a crochet or a
Hmm.
knit or embroidery. We needed to, since at Hillfolk we're like selling products that cover the wide discipline, we knew we needed to create a whole series of kits that covered all the different craft disciplines. Second, we knew that we needed to create crafts that were easy to finish because what we wanted to help people with is to overcome that sense of intimidation when you look at the craft aisle and you're like, I don't know where to start. And when do I have the time? Right. So we knew that we needed to create kits that were small enough, bite-sized enough that people wouldn't be intimidated looking at it and think that this is going to take me a year to finish. There's no way. We wanted something, especially like when you're doing a craft kit where you want kids to get engaged, which is another big demographic that we're working with. If you want, elementary to high school kids to get engaged, you don't need to do a cross stitch that's like 2 feet by 3 feet. Make it small and make it something that they can finish in an afternoon. And then the other part about innovation was we also knew that in the craft ecosystem, a lot of what had been and was on the shelves in mass market it was kind of like dated.
Mhm.
It was much more for like, for like the grandmas and, great grandmas. It was like the aesthetically, like it wasn't modern. It wasn't something that like, a young person would look and say, hey, I want to make that. I want to invest my time and money in that. And then the other aspect to this was social media,
Hmm.
and this goes back to from when I was a kid, growing up and teaching myself how to knit out of a library book that had black and white steps, I was like, man, I really wish that I had, we have YouTube now. And so like, I'm like, for written instructions are great because we need to have both, right? So it's like, there's benefits to both, but together it's really powerful. So we knew that there would have to be content created along with each of the different kits that we have in our assortment to be able to provide, again, that scaffolded support for a crafter. Price point is really important. So we needed to make it, somewhat reasonable in costs, because that's another big barrier to access is like, a lot of people don't have the money to spend $30-$40 on a kit, but can you make something that's, in the $8 to $12 range? So those were the questions that we were asking ourselves, and those were the things that we were keeping in mind as we were kind of developing what the kit should look like, how they should kind of like enter the market, and then who would be the retailer. So we've been working with the Walmart supplier for the last 3 years on building out this strategy and coming up with the kits and doing product development and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode in itself. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So we're really, look, I'm a small business. Like Hillfolk has been my side hustle. It's been my passion project. This whole time that I've been running this business, I've also, my full-time job has been working in active transportation and diversifying outdoor recreation and bringing more people like me into the outdoors and doing all that stuff. But I've found that those skills transfer. The work that I've done in the nonprofit sector, the work that I've done in project management and consulting and all of that kind of stuff has really helped the work that I'm doing at Hillfolk. And now I'm really excited that, with this launch, I'm going to be able to like actually pay myself out of this gig. So
yeah, that's great.
Exciting time for us, and the other thing is, especially in this current craft ecosystem, like your local quilt shop, your local yarn store is in danger. Like a lot of them are closing and have closed because the environment for small businesses is really challenging. And so, we also knew that from an innovation perspective, that in order for us to survive, we were going to have to think outside the box. And it's not going to just be this brick and mortar that's going to sustain us. When, my partner and I were coming up with the name for this business from the very beginning, we knew that we needed to create a brand that would feel local. That Hillfolk, it resonates not just with people who live in Northwest Arkansas and we're in Little Rock, we see Pinnacle Mountain or we see the Ozark Plateau, but my parents are from Korea, and Korea is a very mountainous region. Like I want this to feel applicable to someone who's buying my kids there. So that's kind of how we've had to innovate on the traditional yarn store format, is to think about, how are we not just building a brick and mortar experience for people coming in off the street, but how are we creating a brand that will resonate with people all over the world?
Yeah. Hillfolk are a different breed, no matter where you live. They really are. They're not like the Flatlanders.
Yes.
Yeah.
It takes resilience to exist out here.
Oh yeah. I mean, perseverance would be the word I would use. They know how to persevere.
Yes.
Hence Hillfolk, all right? Perseverance. Exactly. Well, this has been great. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I am convinced that there's going to be people listening to this that are going to feel inspired about doing their thing. So thank you for sharing.
Awesome. Well, and I need to come visit you and your wife when we're down in Little Rock, because we've got Walmart stores in Little Rock that will
absolutely. Yeah. So my wife is a psychiatrist. We both can use all of that.
Yes, and we know crafting has like incredible mental health benefits. So
that's right. Well, thanks for being on the show.
All right, thank you, Alan.